great-grandparents got here, they would not have been welcome because they were not considered part of what America really was. I also did some looking at Polish DNA and find out you would be shocked at where a good chunk of Polish DNA comes from. India and Iran. That's all I'm going to say. So I got annoyed by this, and it just so happened I was reading in the New York Times book review a book that is so good that the author points out that even though this book is brand new, by the time we finish reading it, it'll probably be obsolete and major theories will already be disproven. That's pretty cool when you think about it. He is a product of the Max Planck Institute, which is the genetic place in the world. His name is David Reich. He has brought all of that information and now works for Harvard. And it's called Who We Are and How We Got Here. It is an absolutely wake-up call. And so I share with you, this is a book you might want to read if you want to really annoy yourself about where you think you came from. And then on top of that, my long-suffering wife was dragooned into doing an Ancestry DNA, off we did, and then I was so surprised at the results, we did MyHeritage. And so we have, good morning, here you go. We have, Lois. We have all kinds of results, and in the process I asked everybody else to share their DNA, so we have all kinds of things, and then at the end I'll give you a chance to share what it's like to when you're about a bunch of people who look like you, which is interesting. Okay, to begin with, the Bible. I love it when people quote the Bible and don't know what they're talking about. And this is one of those things that it's been my experience that most people know what people have said about the Bible, which is usually wrong. In fact, one of the things I do, which is fun in my religion classes, I will take a quiz of the Bible. I say, tell me what you know about these statements. None of them are from the Bible, but everybody identifies them as being in the Bible. Or then I'll take another quiz and I will say, you know, is this right or wrong as you understand the Bible say? And they're all not, again, not in the Bible. And it's amazing how many people know things that have been said about the Bible, but know very little of what the texts actually say. So let's have some fun. Number one, I asked Carol to read, do you have that, Carol? I asked Carol to read the four. You have the, okay. I asked Carol to read from Genesis to begin with, right at the very beginning. Did anybody pick this up? Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, which means the land of wandering east of Eden, and Cain knew his wife.
Where'd the wife come from?
Thank you. Adam, Eve, Cain and Abel, and suddenly the wife appears. Hello? I mean, I always got a big kick out of that. Then he builds a city. For who? I mean, where did the city come from? It says, and he bore Enoch and he built a city. And I thinking, for what? Ghosts? I mean, this.
No, ghosts wouldn't have existed yet. Because not enough people had died to be ghosts.
There's always one. Always one who puts it. Right, there wouldn't have been anybody dead to make it ghost. Right. The reality was the ancient Hebrew scribes were not interested in dotting the I and crossing the T. What happened was somebody said, how far back can you remember where we came from? And so they kind of, you know, sloughed around and came up, never thinking somebody would take this literally. This was meant to be, well, far, far back ago, as long as we may happen to remember. And so, yeah, wife came along, and nobody actually knew where she came from, but you were never to take this literally. But for those who were literalists, it proves right off the bat that she was not of the lineage of Adam and Eve. So right off the bat, we have an admixture. We have Adam and Eve, and Cain and Abel, but whoever Lilith's not in the Bible.
Also, the Old Testament was written as a mosaic by different groups of people.
Right, different groups of people. So whoever his wife was already is an admixture. She came from somebody other than Adam and Eve. Your first admixture. That means the offspring are going to be a mixture. All right, number two, the Exodus. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, 600,000 men on foot. That does not include children or men and women. Then it says the following, and everybody forgets. It's probably the most key point in the entire Exodus. A mixed multitude went up, which meant you had Hebrew slaves, but you had a whole bunch of others, each one representing its own genetic background, which means when they're in the desert, let me put this politely, things happen. As a result of things happening, other things are born, which means they're admixtures of admixtures. So right off the bat, we're stuck in the Bible with no purity to begin with. Then we have, people used to go nuts at this when I had kids read this in class from 2 Samuel. It said, sons were born to David at Hebron. It mentions 6 wives. Did anybody catch up anything different about the wives?
One of them was someone else's
different
wife.
kingdoms.
They're from different kingdoms. Every one of those is from a different geographic area. None of them is a nice Jewish girl. They're all they're all Gentiles. They're all pagans. They all come from different areas. So that means he's got 6 offspring, all of whom will be in line to follow him. And all of them will be in line to follow him. So see what I'm saying? You've got then an admixture right off the bat following David. So when it says somebody is from the house of David, the Messiah, that means that they're going to be an admixture too. They're not going to be all Jewish. And we also find out, by the way, that when we studied after 1948, when Israel became a state, Israeli archaeologists went nuts. And they found out that most of Judaism is Canaanite, historically. It's the idea ultimately will be Israel. Does anybody know what the root word of Israel is? El. Who was El? El was the god of the Canaanites.
Yeah, Baal.
Yeah, Baal was his son. So the word Isra means let El rule. The Canaanite god was El, so when you had other people settling in, ultimately it's a Miami moment. You had people coming in, settling in that were semi-nomads. You had the people that lived there. You had other people coming in. They all interbred. And several hundred years later, it will become known as Israel. And they'll often be called Hebrews because a lot of the Hebrew were migrants that settled in.
Do you have the term Ram changes Abram to Abraham? Could that have a similar root?
No, unfortunately.
Okay.
All right. Now, finally with Matthew. I don't know, as I was reading this with Matthew, there were 4 women that were named. This caused a scandal, and if you don't understand genealogies, which I never did, I missed this completely. Does anybody know who Tamar was? Oh, this is going to be lovely. Back in the day, and they still have this in some parts of the world, if the oldest son dies,
That's where it's widowed.
and you are left a widow, you're supposed to have all the sons, the brothers go in and have offspring that didn't have it. So Tamar got mad, and she got mad at her father-in-law. She dresses up as a woman of pleasure. He goes in to see her, gets her pregnant, and then when it says your daughter-in-law has played the harlot, she produces his slipper and his ring and says, guess who the father is? This is part of the genealogy of Jesus, but you didn't know that. Next, Rahab. Does anybody know who Rahab was? Rahab was a woman of the evening. She was a prostitute in a Canaanite city. Bet you nobody knew that. Number 3, Ruth was a Moabite. Ruth was a Moabite. It's like living in Jordan and saying that you're part of David's offspring. And let's not forget who David's ultimately who will follow him to the throne is Solomon. Solomon's wife was Bathsheba. And in case anybody forgot the story of David and Bathsheba, I had one of the funniest things ever happened to me. I had a very delightful young student who I asked to read this story in class, and the person had never heard the story before. And this was a very devout student who went to a very, very, very conservative congregation.
Leonard Cohen's song Hallelujah is based on David and Bathsheba.
So he reads the story, and he goes, "Oh, look, he says to me, did you know what's happening here?" I said, "Yes, actually, I have read this. I have read this." I said, "If you're scared now, wait till it gets further." For those of you who missed the story, David got up one afternoon, and to show you he wasn't living in a great kingdom, Uriah's house was right next door, and his wife was bathing at the top on the roof. And it was in the afternoon, he sees this South Beach wonder bathing next door and calls him over, and he said, "You can't do that. It's Uriah's wife, and since he's the king, he pulled like 45, and so therefore he has the person come over, and he doesn't know what to do because it turns out she's with child, and so as you've read the story, he gets his commander to send her husband to the front, gives a signal, the troops pull back, and he's murdered. It's premeditated murder because he has the man, Uriah, carry the letter condemning him to Joab, has no idea what's in the letter, and he's murdered. And so you have this scandal in the genealogy of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. All of which means that if you want to take a look at the admixtures and offspring, there is no purity anywhere. You start out with Cain's wife. You start out with a mixed multitude leaving Egypt. You start out with David's many, many sons from many, many wives from many different geographic areas. And that doesn't include all the different people that are in Jesus' own background. Now, Matthew did this on purpose. And he did this to show that if you're going to talk about a Messiah, you have to talk about somebody who's really human and somebody who really, really, really understands that represents all of humankind. Now, this did not go over well when he published it, but he had an idea in mind. His congregation was changing. It was all Jewish, it was probably in Antioch, and it was now becoming heavily Gentile. And he wanted to be sure the message was for everyone. And to prove it was for everyone, what does he do? He brings out the genealogy. Now, what does that have to do with us? After having listened to that forecaster about how America is not what it should have been, or is, I went looking at our history. Most of us forget there was a time before Homo sapiens. We haven't been around long, folks. We really haven't been around long. Although the apple cart was upset in a find in Morocco 2 years ago, where they found that the oldest living Homo sapien is 330,000 years old. That's not a long time considering how long everybody else has been around. How many have heard of Homo erectus? Was in China 1.7 million years ago. Neanderthals. Don't laugh at Neanderthals. It turns out everything we were taught about Neanderthals growing up is totally wrong. And they did have an overlap with Homo sapiens, and it turns out it wasn't a blood fest. They just got outbred and diluted. The lines got down diluted after there were not that many of them. It turns out that Neanderthals lived in cold weather. It's hard to have a lot of old offspring in very cold weather. However, when you live in Africa and it's very, very warm, or you live on the Indian subcontinent, it's very, very easy to have offspring. Weather is a big deal in terms of producing offspring. I don't know if any of you ever thought about that. I certainly didn't. Denisovians is another group we just came aware of a few years back. And now the big thing is ghost groups. You have a group, and you have a group, and you somehow get together, but after 200,000 years, there are traces of your DNA, but because you have mixed together, and then your two groups mix with your group, and your group mixed with your group, over a period of time, your individual group and your individual group gets lost. But there are traces of DNA. And we now know there are whole groups called ghost groups that existed that are all kinds of backgrounds that we're just finding little hints of. Now, the complicating factors. Geography. I don't know how many of you made the mistake I did. You see that kind of turquoise thing there? That turquoise? When I heard the word steppe, in terms of looking at humankind and the way we evolved, I kept on thinking of far, far Russia. I mean, like, you know, in Siberia. I did not know this green area stretches from Hungary all the way to Mongolia. It is 5,000 miles of flat grassland. Look how long that is. 5,000 miles of straight, flat grassland. You want to know how people were able to move? I kept on thinking everything was mountains, but no, there is an area that is straight, flat grassland. That's like a huge highway through a major chunk of the planet. I was all wrong when I heard steppe. I had no clue it was that long and that wide. Okay, number 2, the steppe, the coast. People move along the coast. The first group out of Africa moved along the coast. The second group out of Africa moved along the coast, went along the southern coast of India, did a hop, skip, and a jump, and became Aborigines. I don't know if you ever saw the National Geographic thing on this. It's a riot. The San, which is still the most primitive group in Africa, talks by clicking. They click when they talk. National Geographic took a picture of several people there, took pictures of Tamil in southern India, and took pictures of Aborigines, and you can't tell them apart. It's the same face. It is the same face. And I remember saying to Maria, did you notice they all look the same? And then we started taking a look at pictures of Eurasians, certain people in Poland, certain people in Western Europe, and you saw the same kinds of jaws and faces, not in Lithuania, but in some more southern parts. And when you see a face that goes back for a while, I mean, the San goes way, way, way back, and stayed in Africa. They didn't leave. They're down by the way, by Botswana, down in just a little north of South Africa. All right, coast, rivers, deserts. Deserts determine where people go and don't go. Rivers determine where people will go and don't go. Weather. If you want to know why people leave, droughts. Droughts, if you have a drought, what causes a drought? There was a huge ice age in Europe. The ice age caused the fertile Sahara to dry up and drought. That caused all the animals to move, and if you want to live, you have to follow the animals. Droughts had a big effect on the way human beings moved and then mated with others. There is ice. There are natural disasters. 38,000 years ago, a volcano went off in Italy and wiped out all of Europe. It was like Nagasaki and Hiroshima. A volcano in Europe, in Italy, wiped out all of what we consider basic Europe today. Wiped it right out. That was followed 24,000 years ago by an ice age. There were glaciers down to the Mediterranean. That wiped out another group. Homo sapiens are a very fragile group, by the way. And then, guess what happened 5,000 years ago? Do you all know this little thing called Yersinia pestis?
The Black Death.
The Black Plague, which we all thought was limited to the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Guess what? It's alive and well in human history, having wiped out major chunks of Europe long before human beings got really populous. Now, the big kaboom. Bear with me, I'm going along with this. The big kaboom. 5,000 years ago, 2 things happened that I completely forgot about. What was invented 5,000 years ago? Anybody know? The wheel. The wheel was invented, and guess what was tamed? The horse. You tame a horse, make a wheel, these grasslands right here, and you're off and running. And we had 2 groups that mixed. One group over here of farmers that were on the move, and another group of hunter-gatherers that lived. Down here, a group on the move of farmers, another group of hunter-gatherers in equal proportions, and the result was us. That's us, folks. A complete admixture, a total. And then on top of that, to complicate things, this completely surprised me. We thought everybody left Africa. You're going to find a lot of you, when you do your DNA, are going to find your DNA is in Africa. But it's not from the original ones who left.
Right.
There's a group that moved back to Africa. Yes, there's a whole group that came from the east and repopulated Africa. So if you see your DNA showing up in Chad, the Sudan, this is groups that came from the east and brought it back with them, with Neanderthal genes and a bunch of other stuff. We are a mess. Now, to have fun with this, I asked some of you to share your DNA. Some of you may know Hector. What did I do with this thing? Ah!
You left it over.
Here it is. Hector is Puerto Rican, he thought. Did his DNA, and he found out that he is Iberian Peninsula and Southern Europe, 45%.
It's an island.
45%, that leaves a lot left, doesn't it? You ready for this? Native American, 12%. English, 10%. Scotland and Wales, 4%. Now, what is a Puerto Rican doing with Scots and English and Native American? Ready for this? Okay. Maria Teresa Estrada is from Medellin. She is all Colombian, or so we thought. 23% English. That's infuriating. She has more English in her than I do. How could that be possible? She has more English in her than I do. You look English, but I have more English in her than I do, and she's got 4% native Colombian, from the natives. All right, some more of this stuff. I did a DNA, and I found that I had 25% Scots and Irish, 12% Saxon, 12% Viking, and another, Viking. Altogether, 47% of me is Conan the Barbarian. Viking, Saxon, Scandinavian, and Irish and Scots. But the rest is Ashkenazi Jewish, Polynesian, East Asian, and Northwest Russian. Now, this tells me that if we're going to take ourselves seriously, somebody made the suggestion to me, everybody at birth ought to get their DNA done by law. So get rid of this nonsense that there is some pure race that doesn't exist. This book makes it clear over and over again, whoever thinks that obviously knows nothing about human beings. Human beings tend to be, this is embarrassing too, my grandfather was 100%, we thought, Mohawk. My father was 50%. Mohawk doesn't show up anywhere. And we're trying to figure out why, and I said there was some English to show you. 10% of me is English. My wife has 23%. She's Colombian. I get Scots and Irish, but very little English. And I said the English and the Mohawks obviously spent time together in North America. The reality is human beings move. Human beings get lonely. Human beings move into different areas. They meet new people. This is Miami. Look at Miami here. Look at all the different people we marry. 75% of the people I officiate their weddings are from different backgrounds. Yesterday, he gets married. He's Ashkenazi Jewish, Polish and Russian. She is Dominican Republic. They're madly in love, have been together for years. They've got a great marriage. The result of that marriage will be a total mixture. And with the wedding yesterday, I wish you could have seen this. There was a variety of color from the Dominican Republic and from Miami. There were a variety of Haitians there, which bring a whole nother background. We had Jamaicans there, and several Jamaicans came up to me and they said, you mentioned DNA, can you guess a background? I said, you've got Chinese in you. He said, how did you know? And so the reality is we are all a mixed lot. Which means if you're going to take the Bible seriously, then take it seriously. Read the text. And read it from the very beginning. We were a mixed lot, and it was so, and it was good. And it was good. And that's where I leave us. It was a mixed lot, and it was good. Amen. Let us have a moment of quiet.